It's a great pleasure for me to join this conference and share my thoughts on a very pertinent topic, regional cooperation in conflict prevention in the Horn of Africa region. And I'd like to start by thanking the organizers for the kind invitation and congratulate them on the wonderful lineup of themes and speakers. I feel very privileged to be part of it. My contribution will focus on ongoing conflict prevention efforts in the Horn of Africa by highlighting the work of IGAD's Conflict Early Warning and Response Mechanism, CEWARN, which is the organization I come from. And I'll try to expand the conversation a little bit by reflecting some of the insights I think we have gained from doing this work over the past 2 decades in the region. I want to preface my contribution by speaking briefly about why there is an increasingly global emphasis on the need for greater investment in conflict prevention. As you all appreciate, our world is undergoing very deep human security crisis, and the UN Secretary General in his latest report titled Our Common Agenda describes the state of human security in the world as having reached an inflection point. I think that's very alarming. And arguably, a lot of the pre-existing and new challenges that we're facing are overshadowed by the COVID pandemic, which is not only a health crisis, but a very pervasive socioeconomic livelihood crisis. And it has also, most importantly, contributed to the deepening of poverty and inequality everywhere, which I think have very serious consequences in terms of destabilization of communities. I think there are also quite a number of old and new conflicts that have emerged and re-emerged across the world, and in many parts of the world again, and it's true for the Horn of Africa region, climate extremes like floods, droughts, and in our case, desert locust invasion, which came in 2 waves, have had devastating impacts in food security. And if we want to zoom in a little bit further to explore security challenges that are more specific to the Horn of Africa region, I'm sure you all appreciate we have a high intensity armed conflict happening in the region, and at least 3 of IGAD's members are undergoing political transition that can be described as volatile. Over and above that, the region continues to deal with challenges of violent extremism, intercommunal violence, and in some cases, interstate disputes. So I'm sure you'll agree with me that the magnitude and complexity of these challenges really underscores the need for focus in conflict prevention as the most smart, economically sound, and sustainable intervention, perhaps compared to heavy investment that's needed to resolve intractable conflicts or deal with complex humanitarian emergencies. And conflict prevention done through conflict early warning and response, which is the focus of IGAD's conflict early warning and response mechanism, I think affords member states and citizens engaged in conflict prevention efforts the capability to have foresight, the capability to be able to identify strategic conflict and human security risks, as well as capabilities to understand trends, build scenarios, and therefore be better positioned to share viable options for response to decision makers and influence response operations. Conflict prevention also has a very important dimension, and that is a dimension that specifically looks at structural or root causes of conflict, things like governance, broad development concerns, human rights, democracy, and climate change, and others. And I think this particular dimension of conflict prevention is very important in terms of making sure that peace gains are sustained. So now coming to the work of IGAD's Conflict Early Warning and Response Mechanism, CEWARN, it's a mechanism that has been established in 2002 through a protocol by IGAD member states, which gives it a very robust mandate to undertake conflict early warning and response work in the Horn of Africa region. And our work covers the 7 member states of IGAD. And CEWARN's work is premised on a focus on human security compared to other either state-centric or other narrower conceptions of security. Our work also places very heavy emphasis in terms of the centrality of timely, accurate, and reliable data in informing important decisions in the mitigation and prevention of conflict. So over the past 2 decades of its existence, CEWARN has managed to build a very sophisticated and scalable model across the region that allows it to undertake operations like data collection, analysis, formulation of response options, engagement with decision makers, and supporting response initiatives. And I think in this process, CEWARN has managed to build some very important competencies, and I would like to highlight some of them. I think the first and most important one is CEWARN's approach in terms of building its structures to be platform or network-based. By this, I mean, instead of creating or recreating structures at the subnational, national, or regional level, CEWARN took the approach of co-opting existing government and non-government entities which are already operating in the region with a peace, security, and development mandate, and basically by leveraging their competences and positioning. I think this is very important in terms of ensuring ownership at all levels, as well as making sure the initiatives of conflict prevention and peace building are sustained. For example, extensive data collection activities that we do across the 7 member states are managed by locally constituted information collection networks across the 7 countries again, which are mainly driven by civil society actors. And this elaborate network also helps us to operate decentralized operations and be able to undertake real-time analysis, engagement with decision makers, and deploy response initiatives in different locations, different levels simultaneously. The second competence I want to talk about is the use of state-of-the-art technology. CEWARN uses custom-made software to be able to handle vast amounts of data. This includes voluminous field reports that come in regularly, which are also supplemented by different types of data streams like GIS, statistical information, and media reports, amongst others. And I think this tool also affords us visualization functions that enhance our analytic capacity. CEWARN is also very intentional about making sure that there is regular interface between our early warning and early response operations. We do this by trying to make sure, as much as possible, decision makers are accessible to those working in early warning. And again, as much as possible, every early warning information or alert is matched by timely and appropriate response. And finally, CEWARN places very strong emphasis in amplifying local voices. By this, we mean we look at vulnerable communities or communities that are in the front lines, bearing the brunt of conflicts and crises, and enable them to be able to articulate the challenges the way they see them and how they see solutions are best conceptualized. And we make sure these conversations that are being had at that level find their way into platforms where important decision-making is happening that affects these communities. We also try and channel resources to make sure that peace structures are working at national and subnational level. I think this again enhances ownership and also provides opportunities for those who are most affected by conflict to have a part in sustaining these initiatives. So over the past 2 decades, I believe CEWARN has matured as an early warning system, which has initially experimented with a narrower focus in dealing with cross-border pastoral conflicts for the first decade. But currently it has matured to look at the whole breadth of human security challenges in the region in the areas of governance, security, social affairs, economy, and environment. And we don't do this in isolation. Through the African peace and security architecture, CEWARN is organically linked to continental level efforts that are being undertaken by similar early warning systems hosted by regional economic communities in the different corners of the continent, as well as the African Union's continental early warning system and important decision-making platforms like the African Union Peace and Security Council. So I would have liked to speak in greater detail about the work of CEWARN, but time will not permit me. So perhaps for some of our audiences who may be interacting with the work of CEWARN for the first time, or others who are already familiar with the work that we do and want to learn more, I want to encourage you to refer to a book we have recently published, which is titled Conflict Early Warning in the Horn, CEWARN's Journey. In that book, we have really tried as much as possible to extensively document the mechanism's journey over the past 2 decades in a very human interest and accessible manner. And I really encourage you to refer to it. It's available for free download from the website. You can also reach out to me through the organizers, and I'll be happy to share a copy. So having said that, I want to use maybe the remaining 2 or 3 minutes to share with you what I believe are some of the key insights that we have gained from having done this work in the Horn of Africa region for as long as we have done it. And we believe that these insights are not only narrowly applicable to the Horn of Africa context, but I think will be invaluable in informing broader conversations on the future of conflict prevention in the Africa and beyond. And the first insight I want to share with you is the need for stronger investment in the type of conflict prevention that looks at structural or root causes of violent conflict, those I have briefly described earlier, which are underlying causes, issues related to governance, issues related to democracy, issues related to broader development questions and climate change. I think an investment in recalibrating our early warning systems to increasingly try and tackle these underlying issues will really free the burden of the crisis management or firefighting posture that we find ourselves in when we are inclined to look at more short-term or proximate causes of violence. And I'm not saying this is not being done, but an emphasis in this approach is something that would require a lot more investment and rearrangement of our structures and a longer vision into conflict prevention. The second insight I want to share is also another strategic thinking in terms of conceiving the future of conflict prevention by looking at conflict early warning and response, not as standalone functions, but the principles behind these processes, things like foresight, proactive preparedness, resilience, to permeate all manners of governance processes across sectors, as well as decision and policy making, both at the national and regional level. We think this is very, very important to make sure that all structures across the region are better positioned and better prepared with a crisis-ready posture, and our early warning systems would be more effective that way. The third insight I want to share is also, while our early warning systems at the national level, regional level, and even at the continental level enjoy a level of visibility, recognition, and influence, I think there is still room to enhance their profiles and position them more strongly with clear avenues to high-level decision-making so that they become increasingly indispensable in decision-making processes at the national, regional, and continental level, and be able to provide the wealth of foresight and robust analysis they provide to help our decision makers make better, well-informed decisions. And the last insight I want to share is actually a lesson that was hard learned in the COVID period. I think when the COVID pandemic was reported in our region and governments quickly acted to put in place containment measures that involved severe restrictions in international travel, as well as face-to-face gathering, I think those new realities really threw our traditional working methods off course, and it took us a while to adopt because we were not prepared for it. And I think in hindsight, we understand that working methods in our field need to be reconsidered to be adaptive to unusual circumstances like this, in case we have to deal with a similar situation in the future. So that's all I have for now. Thank you for your attention, and I wish you success with the remaining parts of the conference. Thank you.